Subscribe to Echoes of Tomorrow. We publish new videos every day. Like this video if you enjoy this story, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences. We love giving a voice to our community's stories. The Ghost of 3:15 a.m. In a sprawling mansion in Bel Air, a widowed millionaire lived a nightmare money couldn't solve. Every night, precisely at 3:15 a.m., the terrified screams of his young twin sons shattered the opulent silence. Tormented by a mysterious, dark lady they claimed to see since their mother's passing, the boys had stopped sleeping, and with them, their desperate father. After 5 nannies and the nation's top specialists failed, a new candidate arrived at the estate. She came without prestigious degrees or glowing references, yet carried a quiet calm and utterly unconventional methods. What secret did this woman hold? And what did she do, so different from everyone else, that not only calmed the children, but transformed this family's life forever? The 3-story mansion in Bel Air lay cloaked in a tense silence at 3 in the morning. From the outside, the perfectly manicured gardens and illuminated pool gave the impression of a prosperous, happy family within. Inside, the reality was starkly different. Mr. Julian Thorne, owner of one of the country's largest construction firms, paced the hallways, his eyes heavy with dark circles, his hair disheveled. It had been 8 months since he'd had a full night's sleep. The screams began punctually at 3:15 a.m., just as they had every night since Eleanor passed. Ethan and Liam, his 5-year-old twin sons, would wake in absolute terror, sweating cold and trembling. As if they'd seen ghosts, Julian would rush upstairs, already knowing what he would find. In their superhero-themed bedroom, both beds were empty and disheveled. The boys were hidden beneath the table, clutching each other, sobbing desperately. "Daddy, Daddy, she was here again," Ethan stammered, pointing at the closed window. "The dark lady who takes mothers away. She wanted to take us too," Liam just cried, unable to form words. Trembling so violently, Julian worried his son might be having a seizure. He knelt, attempting to embrace the boys, but they recoiled further, as if any touch might harm them. "My boys, there's no one here. You're safe with me," Julian whispered, but his own voice was shaky. How could he reassure them when he himself felt lost and desperate? The words came out empty, without conviction, because he no longer knew how to be a father after losing Eleanor. She always knew what to do when the children had nightmares. She had a gift for calming any emotional storm with just a hug and a few loving words. The next 40 minutes were a repeat of the nightly ritual. Julian tried to persuade his sons back to bed, offered warm milk, told stories, turned on every light in the room, and even slept on the floor beside them. Nothing worked. Ethan and Liam only managed to doze for a few hours as the sun began to rise, and even then, they awoke tired and irritable, as if they hadn't rested at all. At 6 in the morning, Julian was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard footsteps. Descending the stairs was Ms. Davies, the 5th nanny he'd hired in the past 4 months. The 60-year-old woman had arrived with excellent references and 20 years of experience caring for children in affluent families. On the first day, she seemed confident she could resolve the twins' problem quickly. Now, after 2 weeks of trying, she was visibly worn down. "Mr. Thorne, I need to speak with you," she said, avoiding direct eye contact. Julian already knew what was coming. It was always the same conversation. "I've tried everything, sir. Calming teas, classical music, dietary changes, different sleep routines. But these children need professional help I cannot offer. They haven't slept more than 3 hours a night for months. That's not normal." Julian sighed heavily and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Eleanor used to have breakfast with the children, laughing at their silly jokes and planning weekend outings. Now, that enormous table seemed empty and cold, even when everyone sat at it. "Ms. Davies, I perfectly understand if you wish to leave. I've already taken the children to 3 different pediatricians, 2 child psychologists, and even a neurologist. All tests came back normal. The doctors say it's emotional trauma, but no treatment is working." The conversation was interrupted when Ethan and Liam shuffled into the kitchen, dragging their feet, and with tired expressions that shouldn't exist on the faces of 5-year-olds. They barely touched the breakfast Ms. Davies had prepared. They just played with the food on their plates while staring blankly. Julian watched his sons and felt his heart break once more. These were not the same joyful, energetic children who ran through the house and filled the air with laughter just 8 months ago. If you've made it this far and are empathizing with this story of a father who no longer knows how to help his own children, consider subscribing to Echoes of Tomorrow. This is how we manage to keep bringing you real stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on life's challenges. Your support makes all the difference for our community. Ms. Davies resigned that same morning, joining the list of nannies who had tried and failed to cope with the twins' night terrors. Julian was left alone again, unsure where to turn. He had built a business empire from scratch, solved complex engineering problems, and led teams of hundreds of employees. But here, faced with the suffering of his own children, he felt utterly powerless and lost, like a man adrift at sea without a compass or direction. The following Monday, Julian was in his office on the 30th floor of a commercial building in Beverly Hills, trying to focus on a meeting with Japanese investors, when his cell phone rang for the 5th time in an hour. It was the private school where Ethan and Liam studied. "Mr. Thorne, we need you to pick up the children urgently," the pedagogical coordinator said with a worried voice. "They fell asleep during math class, and when we tried to wake them, Ethan started screaming that he didn't want to go to the dark place." Julian apologized to the investors and rushed out of the meeting, leaving behind a multi-million-dollar deal that had been 6 months in the making. On the way to the school, he called his personal secretary and asked her to contact specialized nanny agencies. It didn't matter what the cost. He needed to find someone who understood what his children needed. When he arrived at the school, he found Ethan and Liam asleep in the principal's office. But it was a restless sleep, full of sudden movements and soft moans of discomfort. "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, but these children need intensive medical supervision," said the principal, a middle-aged woman who had worked in early childhood education for over 20 years. "They can't concentrate on activities, they sleep during classes, and when they are awake, they seem to be constantly alert to some invisible danger. The other students are starting to get scared too." Julian knew she was right, but all the specialists he'd consulted said the same thing. Patience and time were necessary. In the car, during the drive, Ethan asked a question that chilled Julian's blood. "Daddy, did Mommy die because she was sleeping?" Liam completed his brother's thought. "That's why we can't sleep, so we don't die like Mommy." Julian had to pull the car over to the side of the road because his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. It had never occurred to him that the children might have made that association. Eleanor had died in the early hours of the morning from a pulmonary embolism that occurred while she slept. The children had found her the next morning when they went to their parents' room to ask for breakfast. Are you enjoying this story? Don't forget to like and subscribe to Echoes of Tomorrow, and leave a comment with your city and the time you're listening. "My sons, Mommy didn't die because she was sleeping." Julian tried to explain, but the words came out confused, and he realized he didn't know how to address the issue in a way that 5-year-olds could understand. "She had an illness that the doctors couldn't discover in time. Sleeping is safe. You've always slept your whole lives, and nothing ever happened." But Ethan shook his head. "No, Daddy. If we sleep, the Dark Lady comes for us. She took Mommy, and she can take us too." That night, Julian made a drastic decision. He set up a makeshift bed in the living room and decided to sleep with his sons, hoping his constant presence could reassure them. He put the boys' beds next to each other on the large sofa, left all the lights in the house on, and even hired a security guard to stand at the front door during the early morning hours. If the twins were afraid of some external presence, he would do everything possible to make them feel protected. The strategy partially worked. Ethan and Liam managed to sleep for about 4 straight hours, which was already considerable progress. But at 2 a.m, both woke up screaming and pointing at the staircase leading to the second floor, swearing they saw a shadow descending towards them. Julian saw nothing, but the desperation in his son's eyes was so real that he began to question if he wasn't missing some important detail. Maybe there was something in the house that was scaring them, some noise or shadow that he didn't perceive, but that caused terror in the children. The next morning, Julian hired a company specializing in paranormal investigation to check for any supernatural activity in the residence. He didn't believe in such things, but he was willing to try any solution, no matter how absurd it seemed. The investigators spent 2 nights in the house with sophisticated electronic equipment and concluded that there was no anomalous activity. The problem was not in the house. It was in the traumatized minds of the children who had lost their mother suddenly and inexplicably. Throughout the week, Julian received calls from 3 different agencies offering nanny candidates. The first was a retired nurse specializing in childhood sleep disorders. The second had a master's degree in child psychology and worked with traumatized children. The third was an educator with 15 years of experience in intensive care. Julian scheduled interviews with all 3 for the weekend, hoping that at least one of them could find a solution for the nightmare his life had become. Meanwhile, Ethan and Liam continued to have terrible nights. They developed obsessive rituals before bedtime, such as checking under the bed dozens of times, leaving glasses of water at specific points in the room, and reciting prayers they had invented to ward off the Dark Lady. Julian participated in all these rituals, even knowing they made no sense, because he saw that it gave his children some temporary comfort. He was willing to do anything to see Ethan and Liam sleep peacefully again. The weekend arrived, and Julian arranged interviews with the 3 nanny candidates at his home, so Ethan and Liam could meet them personally. The first candidate, Dr. Evelyn Reed, arrived promptly at 9 a.m. with a folder full of degrees and certificates. She had a very technical and scientific approach, explaining sleep cycles, melatonin, and behavioral therapies. The twins felt intimidated by so much medical vocabulary and hid behind Julian throughout the conversation. "What do you see when you wake up scared?" Dr. Reed asked the children directly, taking notes on a pad. Ethan and Liam looked at each other nervously and whispered about the Dark Lady, but she interpreted that as symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that needed to be medicated. "Mr. Thorne, these children need intensive psychiatric monitoring and possibly anxiety medication. I can implement a rigorous sleep protocol, but it will require a lot of discipline." The second candidate, Professor Sarah Hayes, had a softer but still very academic approach. She brought therapeutic toys and books on childhood grief processing. For 40 minutes, she tried to get Ethan and Liam to draw their feelings and talk about their mother, but the children became even more agitated and started crying when she mentioned Eleanor. "They are clearly suppressing the grieving process," she explained to Julian. "We need to force them to confront the reality of death so they can move on." The third candidate arrived 2 hours late in the mid-afternoon, carrying an old suitcase and apologizing for the delay because she'd gotten lost. Her name was Alice Miller, a 35-year-old woman with loose, curly hair and a genuine smile that lit up her face as soon as she saw Ethan and Liam. She had no university degrees or technical specializations, but she had something different in her gaze, a natural calmness that made even Julian more relaxed. "Hello, boys," she said, kneeling to their height and speaking as if they were old friends. "I'm Alice, and I have something very important to ask you." Ethan and Liam, who had been hiding during the other interviews, approached curiously. "Do you like stories about brave dragons?" The twins' eyes sparkled, and they nodded shyly. "Good, because I know many stories about dragons that protect children during the night. Good dragons that scare away anything bad." Julian watched in amazement as Alice managed to make his sons laugh for the first time in months. She didn't ask invasive questions about Eleanor, nor did she try to analyze the children's behavior. Instead, she sat on the living room floor and began to tell an improvised story about two dragon brothers who took care of each other and protected their city from night monsters. Ethan and Liam were mesmerized, sitting beside her and even asking questions about the dragons. "How did you learn to deal with children?" Julian asked when the boys went upstairs to get toys to show Alice. "I don't have academic training," she replied honestly, "but I grew up taking care of my 5 younger siblings after my mother got sick. I learned that sometimes children don't need complicated explanations. They need to feel safe and loved. And when they're scared, we don't fight the fear. We find something stronger than fear." Alice said she had worked as a nanny for families in various small towns in upstate New York, always with children who had some kind of emotional difficulty. She had no references from wealthy families or experience with mansions, but she had stories of children who overcame traumas through genuine care and a lot of affection. "Mr. Thorne, I can't promise that I'll solve the children's problem in a week," she said, looking directly into Julian's eyes. "But I can promise that I will love them as if they were my own children." When Ethan and Liam returned carrying a box full of toys, Alice spent the next hour playing with them on the living room floor. She invented different voices for each doll, created imaginary adventures, and made the children laugh out loud in such a natural way that Julian had to hold back tears. It had been so long since he had heard that sound in the house, the sound of childlike joy, filling the halls that for months had only echoed with cries and nightmares. At the end of the afternoon, when it was time for Alice to leave, Ethan took her hand and asked, "Will you come back tomorrow to tell more dragon stories?" Liam added, "And can you sleep here at home? We're scared at night." Julian saw the sincere look of concern on Alice's face as she looked at the children and then at him. "If your daddy lets you, I'd love to stay here and take care of you," she replied. "I even know a very special story about dragons that protect children's sleep." Do you think Alice's unconventional approach will work where others failed? What's your favorite strategy for comforting a scared child? Leave your answer in the comments below. Alice began working the following Monday, bringing with her a completely different energy to the Thorne household. She didn't arrive with procedure manuals or rigid protocols, but with a suitcase full of curious objects that immediately piqued Ethan and Liam's curiosity. There were colored crystals, small wind chimes, sachets with different scents, and several children's storybooks that looked well-loved and reread many times. "First of all, I need to get to know you two better," Alice told the twins after Julian left for work. "Tell me what's the hardest part of the night." Ethan and Liam looked at each other, still a little shy, but there was something in Alice's calm and inviting manner that made them feel safe enough to speak. "It's when we lie down in bed and close our eyes," Ethan replied softly. "The Dark Lady appears and wants to take us, just like she took Mommy." Alice listened intently, without interrupting or trying to correct what the children said. She didn't talk about death, grief, or trauma. Instead, she asked practical questions. When do they feel safest during the day? What did they do with their mom that made them happy? What are their favorite things about their house? The answers revealed that Ethan and Liam felt protected when they were together. They loved it when Eleanor cooked pancakes on Sunday mornings, and they felt happy in the garden watching the birds. "Then we'll start." "There," Alice said, smiling. "How about we create special protection for you two? Something that's just yours and that no dark lady can get through." The idea intrigued the children, who wanted to know how this protection would work. Alice explained that they would build a magic shield together, made of things that made them happy and feel loved. Throughout the first week, Alice implemented subtle changes in the children's routine, but without forcing anything. She replaced the cold white lights in the room with warm yellow bulbs that created a cozier atmosphere. She placed the small wind chimes in the window, explaining that they had the power to ward off bad energies and attract good dreams. The colored crystals were strategically positioned around the house, each with a special function invented by Alice and accepted by the children. What impressed Julian most was how Alice managed to transform bedtime from a moment of terror into something Ethan and Liam began to look forward to. She created an elaborate ritual she called the Night Guardian Ceremony. First, the children would take a warm bath with Epsom salts and lavender, which Alice said had calming and protective properties. Then, they would choose which dragon story they wanted to hear that night. Alice had a natural talent for storytelling. She didn't just read the books, she interpreted each character with different voices, made dramatic gestures, and included Ethan and Liam as main characters in the adventures. The stories always involved two brave brothers who faced nocturnal challenges with the help of protective dragons. Gradually, the children began to see themselves as heroes rather than helpless victims. After the story came the most important part of the ritual, the activation of the protective shield. Alice taught the children to make a circle of protection around their beds using the colored crystals. Each crystal represented a quality: courage, love, protection, peace, and family. Ethan and Liam repeated aloud that they were safe, protected, and surrounded by love, while Alice lit a small lavender incense stick that gently perfumed the room. The most surprising thing was that this routine began to work. On the first night, the twins still woke up scared, but instead of screaming in panic, they called for Alice in whispers, and she managed to calm them quickly, reminding them about the protective shield and the guardian dragons. On the second night, they slept 5 hours straight. On the third, 6 hours. Julian could barely believe what he was seeing. "How are you doing this?" Julian asked Alice at the end of the first week, when it was clear something extraordinary was happening. Everyone who tried to help the children used scientific methods, proven therapies, medications. "You're using crystals and dragon stories, and it's working, Alice." She smiled and replied simply, "Sometimes science can't cure what only love can." Ethan and Liam didn't need more analysis of their trauma. They needed to regain a sense of safety and control. Alice explained that the secret was not in the crystals or the rituals themselves, but in the fact that the children were actively participating in building their own protection. Instead of being passive victims of something they couldn't understand, they became active heroes of their own story. When a child feels powerful and protected, fear loses its grip, she said. And when they have someone who truly believes in their ability to overcome challenges, they can do things that seem impossible. In the following weeks, the transformation of Ethan and Liam was astonishing, not just for Julian, but for everyone who interacted with the children. At school, teachers commented that the children were more attentive during classes. They participated in activities with enthusiasm and had started playing with their peers again during recess. The principal personally called Julian to congratulate him on the improvement in his son's behavior and asked what kind of treatment they were undergoing. Alice had become much more than a nanny in the family's routine. She prepared special breakfasts for the children, always with some playful element that transformed the meal into a small adventure. Tuesdays were Golden Dragon Pancake Day, made in the shape of scales and served with honey. Thursdays were Brave Knight's Breakfast, with toast cut into shield shapes and colorful fruit smoothies. Julian began to come home earlier from work to participate in these special moments. For the first time in months, he could fully concentrate in meetings because he knew Ethan and Liam were truly well cared for. Alice sent him photos and videos throughout the day, showing the children's activities, and he would find himself smiling in the middle of business presentations at the sight of his happy, playful sons. One evening, Julian came home and found Alice in the kitchen preparing a special dinner, while Ethan and Liam helped cut vegetables with plastic knives. The scene was so natural and welcoming that he stopped at the door for a few minutes just watching. Alice wore a floral apron she had brought from home. She hummed softly as she cooked and patiently answered the children's thousands of questions about each ingredient. "Daddy?" Ethan ran to hug him. "Alice is teaching us to make the dragon's favorite food." Liam excitedly completed. "It's a special stew that gives strength and courage to face any fear." Julian smiled at his son's enthusiasm. It had been so long since he had seen them so engaged and happy with a simple daily activity. During dinner, Alice mentioned she had observed some interesting things about the twins' behavior. "They're sleeping better, but they still wake up sometimes between 2 and 3 in the morning," she explained. "I noticed it's always at the same time, so I started investigating if there was any external noise during that period. I discovered that the house's air conditioning system makes a specific noise when it turns on automatically at 2:30 a.m. For adults, it's imperceptible, but for children in a constant state of alert, it can be disturbing." Julian was impressed with Alice's observational skills. In 8 months of medical consultations, no specialist had thought to check for environmental noises that might be contributing to the night awakenings. She suggested some simple changes: adjusting the air conditioner timer to run in softer cycles, placing a humidifier in the room that produced a constant, soothing sound, and using blackout curtains to ensure no light variations during the early morning. "Do you have training in any specific area?" Julian asked curiously. Alice laughed and replied, "I have training in real life. I grew up in a house with 7 siblings, where my mother worked 3 jobs, and I was responsible for taking care of the little ones. I learned to observe, to improvise, and to find creative solutions to practical problems. To me, sometimes that's worth more than any diploma." Do you agree with Alice that real-life experience can be more valuable than formal qualifications? What kind of hidden noises or triggers might be affecting children in your own life? Share your thoughts below. That night, Julian realized he was observing Alice in a different way. Not just as the exceptional nanny who had saved his children, but as an interesting, intelligent, and caring woman. He noticed how she smiled when hearing the children's invented stories, how she had infinite patience to explain the simplest things, and how she managed to make any ordinary activity special and fun. When the children went to bed, Julian and Alice stayed in the living room talking about the next day's routine. She told him about her childhood in upstate New York, how she had learned to cook with her grandmother, and the challenges of working as a nanny in different cities. Julian found himself paying attention, not just to what she said, but to the way she spoke, the delicate gestures of her hands, and the sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned the children she had cared for over the years. "Alice, I need to thank you," Julian said, when she stood up to go to the guest room where she was staying. "You didn't just help Ethan and Liam sleep better, you brought joy back into this house. It's been so long since I heard laughter in the halls, since I heard my sons excited to do simple activities like cooking or hearing stories." Alice smiled and replied, "That's the most rewarding part of my job, seeing a family reconnecting and becoming happy together again." The month passed quickly, and the Thorne family's routine had completely transformed. Ethan and Liam now slept 8 hours a night without interruption, woke up eager to go to school, and even started asking to have friends over to play on weekends. Julian managed to fully concentrate on work again and even closed 2 important contracts that had been stalled for months due to bad nights and constant worries. Alice had adapted perfectly to the house's routine and created such a harmonious atmosphere that Julian sometimes forgot she was an employee. She naturally participated in decisions about the children, gave opinions on school activities, and even helped Julian with practical household matters that he didn't know how to solve alone. When the washing machine broke, it was Alice who researched technical services and negotiated the best repair price. "Daddy, do you like Alice?" Ethan asked one morning during breakfast, with the typical frankness of 5-year-olds. Julian almost choked on his coffee and quickly looked at Alice, who was preparing lunch boxes for school, and pretended not to have heard the question. "Of course I like her, son. She takes very good care of you," Julian replied, trying to maintain a casual tone. Liam, always more observant than his brother, added, "No, Daddy, Ethan means, do you like Alice like you liked Mommy?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Julian didn't know how to answer, because the question had touched on something he'd been trying to avoid thinking about for weeks. Alice continued preparing the lunch boxes, but Julian noticed she had paused for a few seconds. "My sons, Mommy will always be special in our hearts," Julian began, carefully. "And Alice is also very special to our family, but in a different way." Ethan seemed to accept the explanation, but Liam frowned as if not entirely convinced. "But you get happy when Alice is here, right, Daddy? Just like you got happy when Mommy was here." That question hit Julian squarely, because it was true. He really did get happy when Alice was around. He began to realize that he eagerly anticipated coming home, not just to see his sons, but also to talk with Alice about the day, hear her stories, and observe the affectionate way she interacted with Ethan and Liam. There was a lightness to her presence that made even the most ordinary moments enjoyable. "Do you want to be late for school?" Alice intervened diplomatically, changing the subject and handing the children their backpacks. "Today is gym class day, and you can't miss it." The strategy worked, and the children ran off to find their sneakers, temporarily forgetting the awkward conversation they had started. When Julian returned from school after dropping off Ethan and Liam, he found Alice tidying the living room and noticed she was quieter than usual. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sitting on the sofa as she folded the children's clothes. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Alice said, without looking directly at him. "Have you thought about being in a relationship with someone again? I mean, after Eleanor." The question took Julian by surprise. He had avoided thinking about it because he still felt guilty about moving on while Eleanor was no longer there. "No," he replied honestly. "In the first few months, I couldn't imagine anything beyond the pain of loss, and after Ethan and Liam started with the sleep problems, I didn't have the emotional energy to think about anything but how to help them." Alice nodded and continued folding clothes in silence for a few minutes. Then she said something that made Julian rethink everything. "Eleanor would want to see you happy again, and she would want to see the children with a maternal figure who truly loved them." Julian looked at her in surprise. "How can you be so sure? You didn't even know Eleanor." "Because every mother who truly loves her children wants them to be happy, even after she's no longer here," Alice replied with simplicity. "And a woman who truly loved wants the man she chose to share her life with to be happy too. True love isn't possessive. It's generous." Julian remained silent, processing those words. He had never thought about the situation from that angle. "Can I tell you a secret?" Alice said, finally looking directly at him. "I've become very attached to the 3 of you, more than I should, considering I'm just the nanny." Julian felt his heart race. Ethan and Liam remind me of my siblings when they were little. And you? You remind me of how I'd like a man to take care of me and my family. Alice's confession created a tension in the air that Julian didn't know how to handle. He knew he had also become attached to her, far beyond what would be appropriate in a professional relationship. But admitting it aloud seemed like an irreversible step. "Alice, I don't want to complicate the situation," he said carefully. "You worked a miracle with Ethan and Liam. I can't risk losing that." The conversation between Julian and Alice created a strange atmosphere in the house for the next few days. Both tried to maintain normalcy in front of Ethan and Liam, but there was a tension in the air that the children, with the typical sensitivity of their age, began to perceive. During meals, the silences grew longer and more uncomfortable. Julian started working later to avoid moments alone with Alice, and she began retreating to her room earlier, claiming to be tired. Ethan was the first to notice something was different. "Alice, are you sad?" he asked one afternoon, while doing homework at the kitchen table. "Why aren't you telling the dragon stories in your usual voice?" Liam completed his brother's observation. "And why isn't Daddy eating dinner with us every day like he was?" Alice realized she needed to resolve the situation before the adults' emotional instability began to affect the security the children had regained. That night, after Ethan and Liam were asleep, she went to the office where Julian was working on the computer and knocked on the door. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Our personal problems cannot harm the children's well-being." Julian closed his laptop and agreed she was right. They sat in the living room, on the same sofa where Alice used to tell stories to the children. But now the atmosphere was heavy with tension and unspoken words. "I shouldn't have spoken about my feelings," Alice began. "It was unprofessional of me and created an awkward situation for all of us." Julian shook his head. "No, Alice, you were honest, and I appreciate it. The problem is, I also have feelings that I don't know how to handle." He took a deep breath before continuing. "You're not just the nanny who saved my sons. You brought life back into this house in a way I didn't imagine was possible again. And that scares me, because it means I'm moving on, leaving Eleanor behind." Julian is grappling with guilt over moving on. How do you think he can truly honor Eleanor's memory while building a new future with Alice? Share your perspective in the comments. Alice moved closer to him on the sofa. "Julian, you're not leaving Eleanor behind. You're honoring her memory by choosing to live fully again. She gave you 2 wonderful children and years of happiness. That doesn't disappear because you found someone who makes you smile again." Her words were simple, yet loaded with a wisdom Julian didn't expect to find in a 35-year-old woman. "What if it doesn't work?" Julian asked, revealing his greatest fear. "What if we try something and it ends up ruining what you built with Ethan and Liam? They've already lost their mother. I can't risk them losing you too." Alice took his hands in hers, a simple gesture, but one that made Julian's heart race. "And what if it does work?" she countered. "What if we manage to be happy together and give these children a complete family again?" The conversation was interrupted by small footsteps coming down the stairs. Ethan appeared in the living room, rubbing his eyes, holding his favorite teddy bear. "I wet the bed," he said, embarrassed, something that hadn't happened in weeks. Julian and Alice immediately stood up, setting aside their personal conversation to deal with the practical situation. While Alice changed the sheets and bathed Ethan, Julian stayed in the room with Liam, who had woken up from the movement. "Daddy, are you going to fire Alice?" Liam asked suddenly, surprising Julian. "Why do you ask that, son?" Liam sat up in bed and looked seriously at his father. "Because you two are acting strange, and whenever adults act strange, someone leaves." The observation from a 5-year-old hit Julian like a punch to the stomach. Liam was right. They were creating exactly the kind of emotional instability the children feared most. "Liam, Alice isn't leaving. Julian said firmly. "I promise you, no matter what happens between us adults, she will always be part of our family." When Alice returned with a clean and dry Ethan, she heard the end of Julian's conversation with Liam. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized he had made that promise not only to reassure the child, but because he truly believed in it. "That's true," she added, sitting on the edge of Liam's bed. "I love you both too much to leave. You are my family now." Ethan, still sleepy but comforted, asked a question that changed everything. "So can you be boyfriends like Daddy and Mommy were? So we can be a real family again?" Liam clapped excitedly at his brother's idea. "Yes, and Alice can be our new mommy? She already takes care of us like a mom." Julian and Alice looked at each other over the children's heads. There were tears in her eyes and an expression of pure emotion on his face. "Would you like that?" Julian asked his sons, his voice choked. "Would you like Alice to stay here forever as part of our family?" Both children nodded vigorously, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Then I think we have our answer," Alice said, smiling through her tears. Julian moved closer to her, and in front of his sons, who watched them expectantly, he kissed her softly. It was a kiss full of promises, of hope, and of a love that had grown gradually through shared care for two children who desperately needed a united family again. The months that followed, the Thorne household transformed into a truly happy home. Julian and Alice decided to take the relationship slowly, always prioritizing Ethan and Liam's emotional well-being. They didn't want the children to feel they were replacing Eleanor, but rather expanding the family with more love and care. Alice continued to sleep in the guest room, but now officially participated in all family decisions. She accompanied Julian to school meetings, helped choose extracurricular activities for the children, and even gave opinions on business decisions when Julian wanted a different perspective. The dynamic worked so naturally that Julian's friends began to comment on how he seemed like a completely different person. "You're glowing," said Mark, his best friend and business partner, during a business lunch. "I haven't seen you with that sparkle in your eyes in months. And how are the children handling the situation?" Julian smiled as he spoke of his family. "Ethan and Liam adore Alice. In fact, they were the ones who suggested we become a couple. They feel safe and loved, and that's all that matters to me." At home, Alice had created new family rituals that included Eleanor's memory in a healthy and loving way. Every first Friday of the month was Heartfelt Mom Day, when they would prepare Eleanor's favorite recipe, chicken lasagna, and tell happy stories about her. Alice encouraged Ethan and Liam to talk about their mother's memories, always emphasizing that the love they felt for Eleanor could coexist with the affection they had for her. "Mommy is happy in heaven, seeing you both so well taken care of," Alice would say as they prepared the lasagna. "And I'm honored to be able to love and care for you, just like she did." The children had developed a mature understanding of the situation, realizing that it was possible to love two mothers in different ways, without diminishing the love for either. Julian observed these interactions with deep gratitude. Alice had not only healed his son's sleep trauma, but had taught the entire family how to process loss in a healthy way. She never tried to erase Eleanor's presence from the house. On the contrary, she helped honor her memory in a way that brought peace instead of pain. One night, as they were tucking Ethan and Liam into bed, something magical happened. Liam, who had always been more emotionally reserved, looked at Alice and said, "Aunt Alice, you can be our mommy number 2. Ethan completed, "Yes, Heavenly Mommy Eleanor is our mommy from heaven, and you can be our earthly mommy." Alice had to leave the room to cry with emotion. Julian found her in the hallway. He embraced her and whispered, "You saved more than their sleep. You saved our ability to be a happy family again." In that moment, he knew he was completely in love with this extraordinary woman, who had arrived in their lives as a nanny and had become so much more. At work, Julian had returned to being the focused and successful businessman he always was, but now with a different perspective on what truly mattered in life. He declined unnecessary trips to spend more time with his family, implemented flexible hours for his employees with young children, and even created a grief support program for parents within the company. "You've changed," observed his secretary, Mrs. Peterson, who had worked with him for over 10 years. "After that young woman entered your life, you became more human, more understanding." The employees noticed the difference. Julian smiled, knowing that Alice had truly transformed not only his family, but his way of seeing the world and relating to other people. The nights that were once moments of terror and despair were now the coziest periods of the day. Ethan and Liam slept soundly all night, and Julian and Alice took advantage of the time to talk about future plans, watch movies together, or simply enjoy each other's company. The house had regained the soul it had lost when Eleanor died. One weekend, Alice suggested they take a short trip to the family's beach house in Malibu. It was the first time Julian had returned there after Eleanor's death, a place full of happy memories he had avoided for fear of reliving the pain of loss. "I think it's time to create new happy memories in that place," Alice said gently. "The children deserve to enjoy all corners of the life you and Eleanor built for them." The trip was an absolute success. Ethan and Liam played on the beach, built sandcastles, and laughed freely and carelessly. Julian managed to revisit his memories of Eleanor in that place without feeling devastating pain, but rather a fond nostalgia mixed with gratitude for the happy moments they shared. Alice photographed every special moment, creating a new family photo album that honored the past with respect and embraced the present with hope. 6 months after their relationship began, Julian made a decision that surprised even himself. During a romantic dinner he had prepared for Alice, while Ethan and Liam slept at their paternal grandparents' house, he knelt and proposed. "Alice, you not only saved my sons, you taught me that it's possible to love again, without guilt and without fear. Will you officially build a family with me?" Alice was touched, but her answer was careful and mature. "Julian, I love you, and I love Ethan and Liam more than anything in life. But before I say yes, we need to be sure that the children are truly ready for this change. They went through significant trauma, and a marriage represents an important shift in family dynamics." Julian admired her wisdom even more for prioritizing the children's emotional well-being above her own desires. They decided to talk to Ethan and Liam about the possibility of marriage in a playful and age-appropriate way. Alice suggested they use one of the dragon stories to introduce the topic. Once upon a time, there were 2 dragon brothers who lived with their dragon father in a magic castle. She began the narrative. One day, a very special dragoness came to help take care of the castle and became friends with the family. The dragon brothers were so happy that they asked the dragon father to marry her so she could stay forever as part of the family. Ethan and Liam listened to the story with full attention. When Alice finished, Liam asked, "That story is about us, isn't it?" Ethan animatedly completed, "And you're going to marry Daddy to be our mommy forever." The simplicity and naturalness with which the children understood and accepted the situation confirmed that they were emotionally prepared for this new stage. The wedding was planned as an intimate celebration of the family they had become. Alice insisted on including elements that honored Eleanor's memory, such as using some of her favorite flowers in the decor and including a discreet photo of her at the altar, symbolizing that she would always be part of the family's history. Ethan and Liam actively participated in the ceremony as ring bearers, carrying the rings, and talking about how happy they were to have a complete family again. During their vows, Julian said something that moved everyone present. "Alice, you taught me that love is not a limited resource that diminishes when shared. You showed me that it's possible to honor the past while building a future full of hope. I promise to love you and be the best father and husband I can be, always remembering that our family was built on a foundation of love, care, and second chances." Alice, for her part, made vows that deeply touched Julian's heart. "Julian, Ethan, and Liam, you taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about choice, care, and unconditional love. I promise to honor Eleanor's memory by being the best stepmother and wife I can be, always putting the love and well-being of this family above all else." Their honeymoon was a family trip to Disney, which might seem unconventional, but perfectly reflected the couple's values of always prioritizing the children. Ethan and Liam had more fun than ever before, and Julian and Alice managed to have romantic moments between the family activities. It was the perfect honeymoon for a family that had formed in a non-traditional but deeply loving. When they returned from the trip, Alice officially moved into the master bedroom, but kept a small space in the guest room as her personal nook, where she kept her favorite books and some decorative items she had brought from her hometown. The transition was smooth, because in practice, she was already an integral part of the family for months. Ethan and Liam adapted perfectly to the new dynamic. They naturally started calling Alice Mommy Alice, without anyone suggesting it, and developed special little rituals with her, like preparing surprise breakfasts for Julian on weekends and creating invented stories during nightly baths. The school noticed the children's complete transformation. The educational psychologist commented to Julian, during a parent meeting, "Ethan and Liam have become examples of resilience and healthy adaptation. They speak of their family with such affection and security. It's inspiring. You have achieved something extraordinary, creating an environment where they could process their mother's loss and open themselves to new family love in a natural and healthy way." Julian knew that none of this would have been possible without Alice's wisdom, patience, and genuine love. She had arrived as a temporary nanny to solve a specific problem, but she became the fundamental piece that allowed his family to rebuild even stronger and more united than before. A year after the wedding, the Thorne Miller family had solidified as an example of how it's possible to rebuild happiness after a devastating loss. Ethan and Liam, now 7 years old, were secure, affectionate, and emotionally mature children who spoke openly about their two mothers with love and gratitude. They had created a healthy narrative about their family history that included both fond nostalgia for Eleanor and the joy of having Alice as part of their lives. Julian had become a different man, more present, more emotional, and more grateful for the small joys of everyday life. His professional success continued, but now it was balanced with a rich and satisfying family life. He frequently told his friends that Alice not only saved his sons, but taught him to live fully again, without guilt for being happy. Alice had found much more than a job when she agreed to care for Ethan and Liam. She discovered her true calling and built the family she had always dreamed of having. Her intuitive and loving approach to caring for traumatized children attracted the attention of other parents, and she began to receive invitations to give talks on alternative childcare and the creation of secure emotional bonds. One weekend, while watching Ethan and Liam play in the garden, Julian said to Alice, "Have you ever thought about how our story might have been different if I'd hired any of the other nannies?" Alice smiled and replied, "I think things happen at the right time and in the right way. I needed a family as much as you needed to heal. It was perfect for all of us." The conversation was interrupted by Ethan, running towards them with an important discovery. "Mommy Alice! Daddy! Come see, there's a bird's nest in the tree and the chicks just hatched. Liam arrived right behind, equally excited. They're 3 baby birds, and the mommy bird takes care of them just like you take care of us, Mommy Alice. While observing the bird's nest, Alice had a special idea. How about we create a photo album telling our family story? From when I arrived until now, through the wedding and all the special moments. The children loved the idea and spent the entire afternoon organizing photos and recounting their favorite memories from each moment. The album became a family treasure. It had photos of Alice telling the first dragon stories, of the nightly protection rituals, of the special breakfasts, of the marriage proposal, of the wedding itself, and of all the small, everyday moments that built their new family reality. Ethan and Liam especially liked a photo where they were hugging Alice and Julian on the beach, all genuinely smiling, an image that perfectly captured the happiness they had achieved together. One night, as they were tucking the children into bed, Liam made an observation that perfectly summarized the journey they had taken. "Mommy Alice, remember when we were afraid to sleep because we thought we were going to die like Heavenly Mommy Eleanor?" Alice nodded, still emotional, remembering those first difficult days. "Now we're not afraid anymore, because we know you two are going to be here when we wake up, and that Heavenly Mommy Eleanor is watching over us from heaven too." Ethan completed. "It's like we have 2 protections, you two here on earth, and Heavenly Mommy Eleanor up in heaven. We're the most protected family in the world." Julian and Alice looked at each other with tears in their eyes, moved by the wisdom and emotional maturity the children had developed. That night, after the children slept peacefully, something that had become completely natural. Julian and Alice sat on the living room sofa to talk about the future. "Have you thought about having our own children?" Julian asked carefully. Alice smiled. "I think about that every day, but I also know that Ethan and Liam are already my children at heart. If we have more babies, it will be an extra blessing in a family that is already complete. So let's see what the future holds. Everything we've achieved so far has been better than I ever imagined was possible again," Julian said, kissing Alice's forehead. Alice agreed. Love has an interesting way of multiplying instead of dividing. The more love we give, the more we receive back. Thank you for being part of Echoes of Tomorrow's incredible family that grows every day. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this one, and leave a comment below. Have you ever gone through a situation where you had to rebuild your life after a loss? How was your experience finding hope again? I want to know your story and how it transformed you. See you in the next video.